Thank you all for being here today. My name is Matthew Sorolla. I'm an assistant professor in accounting and control and audit at the Toulouse Business School. With me today, I have 5 esteemed panelists to discuss The Accountant, the movie that we're analyzing today. First, we have Ingrid Giaco, the professor of accounting and popular culture at the University of Edinburgh Business School. We have Caroline Lambert, professor of accounting at HEC Montreal. Erica Pimentel, assistant professor of accounting in the Smith School of Business at Queen's University. Cecilia Drujon de Astros, assistant professor of accounting and control and audit at Toulouse Business School. And Camille Gotti, assistant professor in accounting and control and audit at Toulouse Business School. Today, we're going to be discussing The Accountant, movie from 2016. Whoa, the screen's jigging out on me. It's kind of all of us work in and around accounting. So it's not the greatest logical leap to see why I've kind of asked all of you here, but I was wondering if we could go around and just everybody could speak a little bit about how they came across the movie The Accountant. Maybe you'd never seen it before. You got a random email from me asking you to watch it. I don't know if this is good or bad, but I saw this in the theaters when it came out. I was very excited to see it. But I just kind of wanted to go around and ask everybody kind of what you'd heard about this movie, if you saw it when it came out, and just what your general thoughts were. Kind of like I was saying, when I went to the movies to see this when it came out. And I had this feeling of, I don't want to say shame, but seeing this movie about a guy that is obviously playing up all these autistic stereotypes and then is this like assassin and all this, I felt kind of corny for liking the movie, but I also saw like lots of little character traits that made sense to me, right? And I was kind of a little bit ashamed, but at the same time, I thought it was kind of funny that I could relate to a movie like that. The more and more that I poured over the movie to prepare for this session and stuff, I think I started seeing other aspects of the movie, or I would say I interpreted it differently. But I was excited, and the first time I saw this movie, I generally liked it. So I don't know if anybody in particular, I don't know if Erica, do you want to jump in first?
Sure. So when I hadn't seen this movie before, and apparently it's a very violent movie. So I really didn't know what to expect to make the connection, but he's an accountant, but he's an assassin. Like I didn't know what to expect. And so I found the first half of the movie was much more about his role as an accountant. And the second was much more about his backstory, his other life. And I feel like when accountants are portrayed in the media, they're either interesting because they're crooked, or there's some sort of speculation about are they neurodivergent, and they get put into all these little boxes. And so I feel like this movie didn't delve too far, didn't go too far from that. Like if I think of The Big Short, which is about accountants, and why do we talk about accountants? Because they're crooked. So I just hope that someday we'll get a movie about accountants that maybe is a bit more positive, that shows other things that accountants can be. So I felt like this movie kind of stayed close to what I would expect a movie about accountants would tell us.
Okay. Caroline, do you jump in?
Yes, of course. I had actually never heard about this movie before you contacted us. I was really puzzled with the film because for me it was basically a film about an Asperger autistic guy first. And I thought that, the focus and thinking about the scenario and how they would deal, the filmmaker would deal with the stereotypes. I think they were maybe much more focused about giving something which would be quite realistic about autistic Asperger high-level character rather than accountant. So for me, it was really surprising that even, he was an accountant, but, it's why not? But then after this, it's okay. So this autistic character is an accountant. And then you mix and you think about the relationship between, the characteristics you expect or the stereotypes you would give to an autistic character and an accountant. So this was the first puzzling part, and we'll maybe discuss it further afterwards. And the other thing was maybe this forensic, this very, very particular aspect of my vision of accountants, which is, my maybe French, original vision of accountant, which is rather different than the North America. But I thought, oh, this is really, really different to what I could imagine about an accountant, even teaching the accounting. So this was my two main reactions about the film.
Cecilia, you want to jump in?
Sure. So I've watched the film a long time, probably around the time it came out, and I found it very, very amusing and very entertaining. As myself, I had come from an outsider perspective on accounting to more of an insider perspective on accounting. So the way I saw it was probably different. And I was very amused. I agree with Erika in the sense that, accounting is always, or accountants are criminals and, cooking the books and so on. And here you have this character who's like Clark Kent, he's an accountant by day and he wears his glasses and a vigilante by night. When suddenly he takes off his glasses and he's an assassin, okay? And so I thought, you still have that in the movie, you still have this. Accounting is here the cheat, obviously with the company, but the vigilante is the accountant, the guy who can read through the books and see the cheatery and make it public. So I thought that was a different perspective, and that was really amusing. Even though the movie is not actually that good, because I rewatched it before the panel, and I realized it's so filled with stereotypes, not only about the accountants and Asperger, autism, but it's just a repetition of cliche that you would find in American cinema, especially. And the last thing that I wanted to say, I think the girl character is also interesting because she's also an accountant, which is very different. And the fact that they casted Anna Kendrick on top of that, who's very girl next door, I thought was fairly interesting.
All right, thank you, Cecilia. And Ingrid?
Thank you, Matt. Yeah, I had seen the movie before. Partly because I have a course with my final year students at Edinburgh called Accounting and Everyday Life. And one of the sections of that course is accounting and cinema. So naturally, when I saw this accountant movie come up, that really grabbed my attention. I think it's a kind of a clever idea, a bit of a twist really, to have an accountant as this action hero. So that's quite novel. It bucks the usual stereotype of the accountant. But also I think, as Caroline said, there are some very interesting reflections there in relation to the parallels between autism and maybe the boring bean counter image of the accountant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I didn't really, it's not my kind of movie. I'm very sort of period drama, but, and I found it kind of amusing, funny, unintentionally funny at times. But I think this is a great idea, Matt, because you know it's a big blockbuster American movie, and a lot of our students and potential counting students would be watching this movie. So it's useful for us to think about it and consider some of the stereotype issues that are coming across through it.
Thank you, Ingrid. And there's, Camille, do you want to round us off on the reactions?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, I didn't see the movie. I also, it was when I received your email, I was okay. I didn't know this movie. I will watch it, and I decided to watch it with my dad and his wife. They are not accountant at all, and I really wanted to have their reaction also to see how you can feel about the accounting side of the hero when you're not part of this profession. And they were a little bit mad at me because they told me, okay, we have lost 2 hours of our time seeing this movie. But after all, they told me that the accounting aspect of the hero was not an important side for them. They told me, okay, we like him because he has autism, because he fights for for his I don't know, because he's an assassin. So it's most this aspect that they really. They told me that they really like this aspect of the hero and not the accounting side. And so I was thinking, okay, when you're an accountant and you really want to see a movie where the hero is really playing the accountant part, and for me it was a little bit disappointing also because I expected this accounting aspect to be developed a lot, and it was not the case. Like the movie very quickly put aside the accountant aspect to move to chase, shootouts, fights, etc. So yeah, that was what I wanted to say.
So I think I think a lot of the reactions that you're having, well, I think it's funny more generally that I'm in the minority of people. I was like the minority of people that watched it. Thank you, Ingrid, for having watched this before. That makes me feel a little more normal.
She had to.
Exactly.
It was professional, you know.
Yeah, exactly. It's for class, but I'm still going to take it. I'll take it. So I thought it was funny, some of the reactions that you're all having, because they line up with I think they line up with some of the reviews that I found of the movie. So I found good and bad reviews, but I kind of wanted to put some of them to you because I think that they resonate with some things you were talking about. The Windy Eyed and the Guardian says there's more action than you might expect. Autistic accounting savant. So she really played up on this idea of the autistic accounting savant, and that it's more action-packed than you might expect. So again, playing on the stereotype that accountants are boring and that this was this action movie. I think, Ingrid, to your point about the action hero, or the accountant being the action hero. I also found good and bad reviews of the movie from the autistic community. So a lot of people in the autistic community saying it was good in the sense that it shed some light on autism and got conversations going, but then bad in the sense that it was very like simplistically represented and didn't really like get into the nuances of autism. So, you know, wouldn't be the first time that American cinema has just kind of reduced something complex to jam it through in a movie. But you know, I thought it was interesting that I found both. There was also a review of the accountant by an accountant that has autism, which I thought I'll send it to you all later. But basically in it, he's trying to go through it and talk about, how the systematic nature of accounting, kind of levels of comfort that he finds with it. But yeah, there was also bad reviews, of course, that some people thought that it was just too full of accounting jokes, and that it just confused the plot because they were just trying to play on the accounting trope the whole time through. Noah Berlatsky in The Guardian said the actor plays a man who uses his disorder to balance the books for criminals in a film that struggles to balance derivative action and underwritten romance, which I thought was a biting criticism of the movie. Yeah, but a lot of people, I found it funny in the reviews that a lot of people were playing on the idea of accountant in their reviews. Like one of them on IMDb, one of the reviews was "The Accountant Does Not Add Up" as the title of their review. Another one was Jason Bourne Gets a Calculator, which I thought was pretty clever. But yeah, just generally, I think some of the points that we're already bringing up resonate across all the reviews that I was finding for the movie.
I was just thinking, like, I mean, I think this is obvious to all of us, but why did they make this autistic man an accountant, right? Why is the accountant the right foil to a clandestine assassin? I mean, we see early in the movie, he's doing a puzzle, right? He's very good at logic. Why didn't they make him a physicist? Why did they make him a rocket scientist? Why did they choose an accountant? So that says a lot about, like, the most polar opposite to the high stakes, exciting life of assassin. And it makes it wonder, if we think about it as a profession, what have we done to get there? And what have we done to enable these types of stereotypes to exist? If you think of other representations of accountants in the media, and I think Ingrid will be a better place to do this, but I think of, like, Ebenezer Scrooge, Ebenezer Scrooge McDuck in the Disney version of that movie. And it makes you think of accountants as being greedy, as being number hungry, as being profit driven. That's a very different side of accounting necessarily than just someone who's so focused on details. So maybe just think a bit big picture about how did we get here and how did we get this bad reputation? Now go ahead, Kimmy.
Yeah, that's perfect, because what I was about to say was between what Matt says and what you say. I also read the audience reviews on the web, and a lot of them mention actually a hero who is good at math, and it was very funny to see that, because it really shows that people do not really understand the practice of accounting and the qualities it requires. Like, actually, we are not pros of math, and maybe I think Pythagoras must be turning in his grave if you hear that. So yeah, I think this kind of movie really contributes to widen the gap between the reality of accounting practice on one end, and on the other hand, the idea that people have of accounting. Like, we are not good at math.
So we start the movie with this kind of grim death scene where there's a man walking through a bar with multiple dead bodies on the ground, and there's kind of this ominous, like, brutal and swift violence that's just occurred. And then we flash to a doctor's office where we're learning about, we're starting to see this young autistic boy being evaluated by a doctor. So this is supposed to have happened 30 years ago. And we get this, the scene is kind of set inside of the Harbor Neuroscience Institute in New Hampshire. And what kind of drives the scene, I think, is this boy, we've already mentioned it, a boy putting a puzzle together, but he's putting it together upside down. and gets to the last piece and he can't find the last piece. So he just starts screaming uncontrollably because he can't finish the puzzle. His sister then goes, finds the piece, gives it to him, and he calms down immediately and finishes the puzzle and turns it over. You can see this. It's this Muhammad Ali, this famous Muhammad Ali photo. But at the same time, there's a psychologist talking to the parents of the kids, talking about what autism is, how it's going to affect their children's lives.
She's not his sister, though.
Not the no, that's right.
She's a psychiatrist's daughter.
Yeah, thank you. The psychiatrist's daughter is the one that found the piece. It's true. So the mother and the father talking to the psychiatrist, and the mother explains that the father's in the military. They have to travel around a lot. So the boy, they're not sure if he's going to be able to make friends. And the younger brother is the only friend that their son has. The psychiatrist then says, maybe you should leave your son here at the school. And the father jumps in to say that, basically saying that the boy can't, if he's sensitive to light and sound, the real world is going to frighten him, and he's got to toughen up, right? Even though he has special needs. So I just at that point, for me, I thought it was, for me, when I saw the way that they were kind of structuring this, what this boy has to do in the world, and this, I think gets reiterated later in like fight scenes, but this idea of masculinity gets implanted really early on about like, you know, you've got to, it's rugged individualism is essentially what I was seeing inside of that, and bringing up that rugged individualism very early, especially with the dad being a military. I can't remember what his rank is, but he was in the military, some sort of commander in the military. And so really early on for me, I thought, okay, we're really going to play into some stereotypes across this movie. Masculinity being one of them. Yeah. But
it's masculinity, but you realize it's going to be very physical also, and you will explain it maybe later in the training, which is kind of the opposite of the, you know, classical office work that an accountant will develop also. So it's really puzzling, and I think it's very interesting to explain the beginning of the movie, because when you begin like this without knowing, you know the title of the film, and you enter in this and you say, what is the point? Where is he? Who is going to be the character? You know, so it's very interesting in this way.
And it's interesting, Callan, that you bring up the idea of the routine office life. If we think about how the accountant grows his network of clients, the whole aspect of commercialism is left out. Right? If we think of the commercials and professionalism divide, this is the accountant who's fastidious, who's trying to uncover errors for the public, for whomever he's trying to, in this case, help the shareholder who's apparently been taken to the cleaners by his partner. But somehow he needs to have some charisma and savoir-faire to develop this network of customers, clients, that he maintains despite having different aliases, different personas over time. So how does he do that? How does he build that network? How does he develop his capacity to attract and retain clients? And we assume that the quality of his work is supposed to be the only thing that's important here, but we all know that's not how accountants do that. So I found it interesting that, you know, the Harvey Specter, if we take an example from The Suits, someone who's a real rainmaker, that was left out of the equation here, which we all know is a big part of being an accountant.
And to the point, Erica, because I think that segues into the scene where Christian is meeting with the farmers. The first scene in the movie when you actually like see Christian come in this accounting role, and of course he's sitting behind a desk. Everything is kind of laid out immaculately on his desk, and as he's listening to this farmer talking about, you know, talking about their business and about needing to build their tax portfolio for the year, he's checking security cameras on his computer, and kind of he's multitasking, let's say, multitasking as an assassin / accountant. But so as he's having inside of this scene with this older farming couple, they start talking about how their farm is basically hitting rough times, and they're worried about how much taxes they're going to pay. And there's a moment where the wife turns to the farmer husband and says, look, maybe we just have to put the taxes on the credit card this year, which, I think the idea of having to use a credit card to then pay your taxes is really, it's very American. But it sets the scene for him to kind of come in and be the hero, because at that point, he looks to the wife and notices she's got this kind of ornate necklace on, and starts asking her about, oh, well, where did you get your necklace? And then that spirals into, she makes them at home. How can we turn these into business deductions in order to, reduce their tax liability? And he's kind of guides them through this conversation, where he's helping them declare expenses to lower their tax bill, which I think plays to Erica, exactly what you were saying about these like soft skills of how does he get his business, how does he communicate with people. And of course, the couple is very happy. The scene ends basically with the farming couple leaving and inviting him out to the farm. They're really happy, and Christian starts telling them about how he likes to shoot, so maybe he'll come out to their farm so that he can do his shooting out there. But one of the reasons why I wanted to focus on that scene is because I think it gets exactly to what we were talking about, like the soft skills that accountants need. That really, I mean, we've already identified everything for what I was trying to pick out here. The soft skills versus that kind of hard math. Oh, you like numbers, that's why you're an accountant. And
it's actually the only scene in the movie where he does actual accounting. The rest of it is math and then killing. It's the only scene. So
I thought it was a scene in which we start to see a lot of the really positive aspects of the accounting stereotype. This is someone you go to for professional advice who can help you with your accounts, help you maybe with your tax, save you money. So, although we often think of the stereotype as having negative nuances, there's really strong positive associations with that scene, and how the accountant is a really helpful professional individual that you can go to sort out your affairs. And I guess the same thing with you'll move on to this later, but when he's called in to help the company find the fraud, again, it's just tapping into that professional ethos. This is somebody you bring in and who can help sort out your problems. So that, I thought that was a very sort of positive aspect of the accounting role that came through.
No, just to say that, like this scene with the farmers, I agree. It shows that it can be good at relationships sometime, but this scene is really short if we compare this to the rest of the film and all the bad aspects, all of his bad qualities in relationships. So I at the end of the movie, I didn't have the feeling that Christian was good at relationship.
After the scene with the farmers, we get introduced to kind of to some new characters, kind of representing the law enforcement, and these are Ray King and Mary Beth, which work for the Treasury Department. and Mary Beth comes into Ray's office, and she's kind of like she's the renegade, she's like the renegade person, huh?
Agent?
Yeah, like the renegade. She's like the renegade agent inside of the Treasury, and he's having this conversation with her about her past, and she kind of gives this canned answer, and then he shows her that he actually knows what her background is, and he's trying to kind of leverage this over her to get her to help him investigate this crime. And he tells her about how he's going to be retiring soon, and he wants to try and tie up this case of this person. So he's looking for her to help her or help him. So when Ray is kind of talking about this case, he explains that he starts kind of identifying how they're trying to look for this accountant, and they're kind of giving the backstory of what Christian has been doing. That he works for the world's biggest criminals. And, I thought it was funny that when he's talking about what this accountant does, because he doesn't know it's Christian yet, he says that these criminal organizations can't just call H&R Block when they're having financial problems, which I thought was a clever little antidote in there. So they continue on. He explains, he kind of explains what he needs her to do, and then we kind of get this, or we switch into this background of Christian at home, right? We start to. The scene starts with Christian driving towards his house. And which the house is very kind of sparse decorations. It's very, very basic. He owns exactly one plate, one fork, one knife, a spoon, and makes himself this very compact dinner, just like his desk was when he was meeting with the farming family. And this was another scene that I thought was a pivotal moment in the film. Just because you're starting to see Christian's home life. You've seen him in the office. Now you're kind of seeing how he is at home. And he's got this kind of very regimented life at home. And then there's this kind of, hard right turn in the scene when he goes and starts performing this stimming ritual in his bedroom, where he turns on this like really heavy metal music. He takes what I think is like a Prozac or something like that, a medication for helping him work through this stimming ritual that he has. And he's playing this heavy metal music. He starts rolling this pen out on his leg, and it was this. That scene in particular, I thought was it was a lot to take in, because you're getting that accounting stereotype, really constrained or regimented life, and then I think they were almost using the autistic side of him to show chaos, is how I interpreted it. Like they were trying to show that he's got that, he's misunderstood, and there's this whole part to him that's misunderstood, and it's kind of packaged in this black box of autism and this weird ritual that he does, and it's so chaotic.
What I found in that moment was a moment of incredible vulnerability from him. There's a moment later in the film where he's doing this ritual and he's crying and he starts beating himself, and we really see the veneer that is all the accounting stereotypes of him being so well packed together. And we realize that not very far below the surface, there's a very troubled man underneath who has a lot that he still is working through. And so I thought the juxtaposition was interesting. And I think that ties back to what Matt was talking about before. about the masculinity tropes or masculinity theme that was through the film. And only when he's alone, when the music is loud and no one can hear, can he really show us that he's a person who's hurting. And that doesn't have to do with the accountant stereotype, because even accountants have multiple roles and multiple role identities. You know, we have the client facing identity, we have our home facing identity, and there's a lot of literature about accountants as they occupy these different spaces. But I thought that was interesting to add some depth to his character.
Yeah, I found it interesting the way that they kept using that autistic angle to give depth to his character. Like, it's such an odd choice of a maybe it was a choice that, you know, it pilot tested well to have an autistic character instead of somebody that was just like naturally chaotic or something like that. But I did find it really weird that whenever they were trying to introduce anything that was chaotic or disorganized, it was somehow feeding back into that autistic angle.
What is interesting in this chaotic character of the Asperger is that the stereotypes goes very deep into the hyper-organized version of being super structured around the meals, around the habits, around, you know, everything, the car which fits exactly into the garage. Also, this was very impressive for me. It was a small detail, but I was, this is weird, you know. You've got lots of place. You can build up a bigger parking lot, you know. But it was interesting, you know, to see how, you know, organization can become pathologic in a way, and that's maybe, you know, relate to one of the stereotypes of the accountant compared to the other organizational members, you know, people who are so strictly organized and focused on details. And, you know, this maybe was a way to reconnect and of course bias, because we don't have the feeling that it's, you know, the reality of accountants, but orientate at least the vision of the accountant. Yeah,
it was what my dad was saying, that we like him not because he's an accountant, but because we see his weaknesses towards his autism, right? We like him because we have empathy towards him. We see him suffering, and we want to help him at some point.
Yeah, I was wondering if they did that, because it's surprising. It's the change from the kitchen and the order to the bedroom and the chaos. And I wondered why they did that, and actually wondered if it was going to serve the plot later on. Like, you know, when you see him more as a warrior, is it why he can withdraw a lot of pain, withstand a lot of pain, and or in fights or whatnot? But it didn't ultimately, and so it was just for giving another depth, I guess, to the character and to this idea of the spectrum. And I thought that was interesting, because they could have not done it. They could have run with as Caroline say, the hyper-organized image, and that would have worked as well, I suppose. So yeah, it's just interesting that they added that. Yeah.
I wonder I don't know enough about autism to comment properly, but I wonder, is this type of ritual something that this idea of, you know, exposing yourself to the flashing lights, the loud music, and all that chaos, and then for you to try to suffer that for 10, 15 minutes and get through it. So I don't know whether that is something that you know, that maybe whoever was advising the movie directors on autism, that they said to clearly to put this in, because for me that scene was more about autism. I didn't connect it too much with the accounting role or the accounting stereotype. it was about how he was learned over time to control himself.
Yeah. It's actually something that you would see in films or TV shows around trauma victims or people who are on the spectrum. Like on Homeland, she listens to very loud jazz music because she suffers anyway. I agree. Yeah, it's totally. It's very likely that they got advice that was part of the reality of.
Yeah, they and when I was reading a lot of the reviews by the autistic community, they were talking a lot about the I know that they had consulting people on the movie to help them kind of gauge what life was like for autistic people, but then there were different opinions about how accurate or how much they were listening to that advice. But to kind of keep going with this this contrast, after we leave his house, we we see the mother. We get this image of Christian's mother leaving him, or we have this flashback to Christian having all these problems at home, and the mother's just kind of tired of it and walks out on him. So it's kind of him and his brother just staying with the father, and the father kind of is not really showing any emotion, which maybe that was the trait that passed down to his son, was not having any emotions at all. But I found it strange in that scene, that there was basically no emotion layered around that except for the mother that was leaving. Then we flash back to the present day, and Christian's talking on the phone with this voice that is basically like his assistant, the assassin's assistant. And they're, talking about, they're discussing new jobs. She's talking to him about this new job at Living Robotics, which is kind of leading into the main plot. But she also is talking about how he needs to sell these Renoir and Pollock paintings. So you start getting this contrast again. Like he's supposed to have this very organized life, or always constrained, but then like he's really into this art that's kind of abstract and chaotic. Again, I guess trying to draw out this contrast. Then we kind of we see this storage trailer that he's got all of his paintings and all of the spycraft materials that he needs to be an assassin. And then we kind of flash back to Mary Beth, who's continuing this investigation. And she's starting to kind of click on to this math connection again, relating his name to these famous mathematicians, Carl Gauss, Lewis Carroll.
I was thinking like the artistic part, like the like Christian likes art, and I was like, okay, what is the link between accounting and art? And but now I'm thinking that accounting requires also creativity. Like when you most of the time you need to be creative, and being a huge fan of art can at some point help to be a good accountant.
I think this is a really clever point that that Camille has made. I think there is quite a strong connection between accounting and art. And if we actually go back to the father of double entry bookkeeping, Luca Pacioli, one of his core texts was illustrated by Leonardo da Vinci. And there was, back in the Renaissance time, there was this very strong connection between architecture, art, and accounting. So I think although one would not put those two together, accounting and art, I think that there's that there is some connection there, and that maybe is what we see in the movie.
Ingrid, you were talking about a course, the accounting, was it accounting in everyday life, or the representations of accounting in media, the course that you said you'd watch this for originally?
Yeah, it's one of our, at Edinburgh, it's for our final year students, final year undergraduates, number of accounting options. So we have a accounting in everyday life, and we have on that course of accounting in cinema, accounting in TV, accounting and art and architecture, accounting and consumerism, sort of shopping. So we try to, and it all stems from Anthony Hopwood's AOS special issue in 1994, Accounting in Everyday Life. So I mean, and that's where the paper by Beard, the 1994 paper, that was the first paper to look at how cinema was used to portray the accountant. That paper was in that special issue. So for me, that's always, you know, just going back and reading that Hopwood editorial. It's just about 2 pages long. It makes it makes the student realize, because we have it in the very first lecture. It makes us, I think, the student realize that actually what we've been doing for the last few years in debits and credits and financial statements and management accounting, there's a lot more to accounting to our understanding of accounting and how accounting connects and relates to issues in everyday life. So.
Is it your experience that kind of takes students off guard, or maybe? Yeah,
I think so. On the other hand, I think they're initially tempted by the name of the course and think it sounds very good, and then they realize actually there's a bit of accounting in but yeah, I think the course reviews generally indicate that they've been pleasantly surprised by the and given a broader insight into the role of accounting.
Then we get the next scene with Christian in his childhood. So it goes back in time again. Christian in his childhood in Indonesia, where him and his brother are fighting this older Indonesian man in this courtyard, and the father's just kind of sitting there with a newspaper watching them fight. Now, after that, we see Christian at Living Robotics, where he meets with the CFO and the CEO's sister. And they're talking about this young accountant. So this is when we're starting to, we're moving towards Dana getting introduced. And they're talking about this young accountant that didn't know what she was doing and was sticking her nose into things that weren't her business. So it's kind of there's this argument about, like, is there really a problem? And Christian's kind of coming in to say, or to take this job. And they're presenting the job to Christian as saying it's way too complex for him. The business is too complex, and there might not even really be a problem. And everything's kind of like they're stacking everything against him, basically. Eventually, after Christian is Lamar's giving the parameters of the job to Christian, the next scene, we get introduced to the lead female in the movie, Dana. So Christian comes comes back to Living Robotics, goes back to the job site. I found the whole thing of him going into Living Robotics and, into this glass conference room, very reminiscent of the very few days that I was an auditor, and having to go on site it kind of left a bad taste in my mouth. So Christian walks into this glassed-in conference room, and he meets Dana Cummings, who's Anna Kendrick, the in-house accountant who found the discrepancies. And she tries to they have this kind of awkward encounter where she's trying to introduce herself to him, and he's, being, like a blank slab, not really engaging with her. And then she starts suggesting that she can give her assistants to walk him through the files and suggest that they go have lunch. But Christian is just not having any of this, and doesn't want to talk to her about it, just wants his files and just wants to do this thing. Just wants to start working and doesn't want to get involved with the woman accountant who had found this issue in the first place. Now, personally, I found it very strange that the one competent woman accountant that is portrayed in this movie came off very, I don't want to say ditzy, but was just kind of dismissed. You know, like Christian is the accounting expert and all of the accounting narrative kind of goes through him. But the woman that found the error in the first place, that was apparently so difficult that, you know, the CEO and the CFO, they had no idea it was there, or they don't even think it's real. But the woman who found it comes in, presents herself as knowledgeable on the subject, and then is shut down out of the conversation. And there's not a whole hell of a lot of conversation they have through the rest of the movie that she contributes to any accounting conversation.
No, but the best thing is that once he does all his calculations on the glasses, he then explains to her the fraud and the numbers. And you're like, she found it. It's like mansplaining 101. That was kind of outraging.
I agree. Sorry, I didn't. I totally agree, and I think this is not a cliche, because when I was myself a financial auditor before being a researcher, and when we were working in a case, and we were in the client space, we really saw that, like, the CEO are all men, and our chief was also a man, and when you were a woman and not the big boss of the audit firm, it was really hard to have a voice, and really hard to say that, oh, maybe I found something. It was hard to be a woman in this case, and I think it's really. It's unfortunately really true in this movie.
But I think also there is this position of the external expert compared to the internal, kind of relationship between the auditor and the local accountant. So, of course, there is this gender issue. It's all over. But there is also this relationship between the outside and the insider, and how you want to be neutral, being the expert from outside and things like this. What surprises me much more there is, we are always talking about this data-driven accounting, and the guy is just with the marker writing numbers all over the way, and he wants real books. He never works on his computer. And I was, wow, this is 1950, This is wonderful. So this relates for me to this math stereotypes. We want him to write numbers because they still mix this math stereotypes and math savant stereotype and the accountant stereotype, and this was really related with this crazy marking, and I was, what is he doing? Really, I know, it's not yet, the big data time for accountants, but still, I mean, I would be surprised that this is real representation of accountant work.
And unfortunately, it was one of the only thrilling scene of the movie.
It's also one of the example in the movie when all accounting matters are cut short really, really quickly. Like, ultimately, he doesn't really explain the fraud, how they did it. Even later on, sorry, Matt, if I'm jumping a little ahead of time, but later on when he finds why they did it and why they reimbursed the stuff with the 80s firm case. Again, like not explained. And the best was at the end with the CEO when he starts explaining, they're going on the financial market and he just shoots him in the face. Like that was the most blatant example of, okay, any accounting talk needs to be cut short. This is not what we're watching. Yeah, and I thought that was very funny actually. Also, I think in this scene where he does all the math, which is ridiculously not accurate actually. I was wondering if they just wanted to put in a Good Will Hunting reference in there just for the sake of it, because they had Ben Affleck and that was it.
To Caroline's comment about the lack of a data-driven, tech-driven, I think my assumption would be that the directors and the producers said that if we put this guy in front of a screen, people are not going to understand that he's an accountant. They're going to think he's a tech guy. And it makes me think of my own research in the blockchain space about how, accountants are trying to convince everybody that we can audit everything, that we have the technological savoir-faire to be in other domains, but we're doing a really, really bad job of convincing the world of that value proposition. And if that's really, as CPA Canada calls it, our future is as data masters, we need to be better ambassadors of that ourselves as a profession. So, yeah.
I think Caroline and all the panelists have made great points about that tying in accounting, the accountant stereotype with the numbers, that there's a really strong association. And I guess it's just from that bean counter stereotype that if you're an accountant, you're good at numbers. And that's what that scene really said to me. This is the Hollywood view of the accountant, someone who's very, very competent and skilled really with numbers. And so that was a very powerful image, I thought, for what this movie was saying about accounting, right or wrong. That's the image that kind of that the audience were seeing, that to be an accountant, this is what you do. You're excellent with numbers. So that was the thing that came across most to me. But as I think it was Camille said, it was the most exciting part. Maybe it's because we're accountants, we thought it was exciting. I don't know.
So after Dana was kind of introduced, there's this misconnection at lunch where she tries to talk to him. Again, another instance of where like he has zero interpersonal skills, has no communication skills. I thought it was really funny. Like most action movies, the idea of sex, love, connection, anything like that, it's out the window. It's either happening and it's just over the top, or it doesn't exist. And you get somebody like Christian that can't interact with anybody, which also I thought was a really weird characteristic to keep layering on top of him, that he can't have these emotional connections with anybody. When, as we've said, when those kinds of connections are so intricate to the role of an accountant. Then we go into him identifying the fraud, where he brings Dana in and explains it to him, mansplains the error that she found to her. We then, flash to the CEO of Living Robotics meeting this henchman downstairs while he's trying to get a late night meal. And he's trying to get the CEO to fake it, or not fake it. He's trying to get the CEO to kill himself with insulin instead of having to shoot him. So it's this linking back to this whole mercenary assassin plot in the movie. And then Christian, we come back to Christian arriving back at Living Robotics as they're wiping all of his work away. So all these amazing numbers that he's just written all over the conference room, they're erasing everything and saying that that the job is finished. The CEO's died. The CFO, Lamar, the CEO Lamar tells Christian that the CFO killed himself. It was unexpected, and he's just very distraught and wants to put all this behind him. So just tries to tie a bow on everything and leave it alone. But then we come to another point in the movie that I thought was really interesting, was how Christian deals with not being able to complete this task, right? So it's a narrative that's woven through the whole movie, where, you know, from the beginning where he couldn't finish the puzzle and started freaking out, and now he's not able to finish this or solve what this fraud was. So he's going home and everything's a little bit off, right? Like he pulls his car into the garage and not far enough. Then he goes in and he starts doing his stimming ritual again, and it's all just off. It takes him longer. He's not able to kind of like calm down. Yeah, and I thought that scene was a good point to contrast with the original stimming scene, right? Where everything was ordered and he had everything together. And then the second he's not able to finish his task, everything just goes into chaos, which I felt was very, very strange, because my experiences when I'd audited, or just my experiences in accounting generally, is that there's not always an easy, simple answer that's there that you can just kind of do the math and be done with this, like solving an equation. So again, I found it kind of weird that they were portraying him as not being able to move forward with his life just because he couldn't tie a bow on this one project. And I didn't think that kind of lined up with what accountants have to do or what they encounter in their everyday work.
Yeah, I remember I had a manager who told me, like, you're never going to be able to finish off your file with a bow on it. That's just not how it works. You kind of finish the file to the best of your ability, given the time that you have. And I think there's a lot of research that suggests that, auditors look for less quality evidence, like experimental research that says that auditors look for less good quality, or will accept less good quality audit evidence as the deadline approaches, or they're going to push less hard in negotiations as the deadline approaches. And so anyone who's audited knows this phenomenon, that when you come back from the client site and you're at the office and you're trying to wrapping up, like literally taking the garbage bag and closing it is what happens, whether that it's wrapped in a box or it's wrapped in a garbage bag. It has to end because there's a hard date, especially for like public company statements and stuff. And so that's why the idea of auditing or accounting being orderly and being as if there is an answer is so incongruent with what we know is real. Like, we know financial statements are not perfect. We know they're full of estimates that may or may not be correct. We know there's material misstatements that are uncorrected in financial statements. And so the movie doesn't make time for that or make space for that, and really just looks at the profession as having very black and white hard edges, when we know that's not true.
Yeah, you're right. But we are not Christian, of course, but it can be really frustrating for an auditor or an accountant if you do not finish the task, actually, because like most of my colleagues were like very precise and were like good students most of the time. So it was frustrating for all of them to not finish the task. It was not like Christian, but still frustration.
I guess that, again, going back to, this is a Hollywood perception or portrayal of the accountant. From that perspective, every debit has a credit, the trial balance has to balance, the balance sheet has to balance. So in a sense, if something's not finished in accounting, there is this disorder. Although I think that whole scene was probably playing in more to the autism side of his character than the accounting.
Yeah. So that I remember when I originally was doing my accounting degree, I really liked the idea that you could, there were quick ways to figure out if you've done journal entries correctly or if you've done a trial balance correctly, because you could balance things off and you could find out, you had these neat little solutions. And then trying to go into practice and not finding that those neat solutions were there all the time. But I think Ingrid, you're right. This scene, I think, might have been trying to, I don't know, carry that plot of being autistic. This again, I got this feeling that there were a lot of different narratives going on in this movie the whole time.
There is also this point of the forensic, he's like a cop. So there is, this, problem which is not solved. And at the end, that's what you're paid for. So, and you're paid for to solve it and to know that to publicize that you solved it. And in fact, he solved it, but he can't publicize it. And this is why he's frustrated. So there is, I think, this aspect of this forensic work as an expert and is really in there, I guess.
And on that point, Carolyn, just because you jumped ahead, because I think Mary Beth actually kind of, even though she's not presented as an accountant, she's presented as this investigator. I feel like she, especially more than Dana, has these like fraud investigative, or she exhibits those qualities, those kind of fraud investigation. So the next scene is again another fun-filled scene with Christian's father, where the brother, he needs to go out and get into a fight to prove that like he can stand up for himself. We get another scene of the henchmen, two henchmen following Christian to the farm where he was doing all the shooting, and they're attacking the lovely old farming couple that were his clients. He comes in and just dominates the situation and kills everybody with his giant sniper rifle, and then just casually waves bye to the farmers as he's left death and destruction in his wake. Then he gets on the phone. He starts talking to this voice again that says, oh, there's all these your cover's blown, basically. You got to get out of there. And Christian starts kind of throwing up, should he, about Dana. He's worried that, Dana might get caught up in all this. Then you flash to Mary Beth, which to Carolyn's point, she's working with this friend that she has at the IRS to comb through the tax returns of accountants that have these mathematician, or the Carl Goss and Lewis Carroll names that she'd been investigating. And they sit there and start narrowing down who these people might be, which I thought, even though it was a fraud investigation, or not a fraud investigation, but even though it was presented as this investigation, this criminal investigation, I thought it was kind of funny that they were going, using these deductive powers to try and like figure out all this information from tax filings of all these businesses around Christian's accounting practice. We get a scene where, again, switches to Christian going to Dana's apartment to save her. There's assassins there that he deals with quickly. Yeah. He then takes Dana back to his house, where she starts asking him more about all these paintings, and she's kind of discovering this other side to Christian. I almost felt like she was this device that was trying to show, she was the voice of humanity, kind of entering into his little world to pick these different things out. And then we see Mary Beth. She's starting to, basically doing all this accounting work, or this tax work, to figure out who Christian is. She starts zeroing in on him, and starts talking to Ray about, that she's found this guy. Christian's then taking Dana to this fancy hotel where he again is unable to have any kind of emotional connection. But right at the moment when the only moment in the movie where they might kiss, he has this epiphany of this fraud that happened in the 80s that leads him to, again, mansplain what this whole entire situation is about. And she is there to receive his explanation and agree with him. Then we basically go through Mary Beth and Ray kind of on the trail of Christian, trying to find him as Christian's, trying to resolve this, he's trying to resolve this case and figure out where this fraud was so that he can complete his puzzle. We get a scene about the background, this Francis character that was kind of the mentor for Christian, that taught him the dark arts of accounting, which I thought was a very up until this point, Christian had always been kind of, you don't really know where his accounting knowledge comes from, but in this scene you start to see that Francis is he's learning about accounting in prison with this guy that used to be an accountant for the mob, which I thought was a really interesting way for them to introduce the accounting knowledge, just because it plays to the stereotypes of accountants cooking the books, right? It's either you have two types of accountants. They either cook the books or they're just the most vanilla, bland people that are worried about organizing everything on their desk.
I was thinking about Dana's experience, about why she went to accounting, and she basically explains that she was fascinated by arts and she wanted to go to arts, and that's the connection with the paintings, and that finally her parents decided that she should go to the accounting profession, and that's what she did. And I think this was very interesting because I think, at least it's many of my experiences with students is this one. I do it because my parents thought it was a good career for me, very safe, very secure, very, and this was interesting to see these two paths towards the profession, one which was kind of accidental, but also, very weird and coming from nowhere, talking about Christian, and the other one, which is the real, I think, stereotype and parts of reality, which is the Dana experience. And I thought it was really interesting to have these two compared.
I agree. I've had all those conversations with students. I wanted to do music, I wanted to do history, but thought, in the end, we thought this was a good career, get a good job out of it and that. So I thought that captured whoever was advising them on that, got that quite right, as people sometimes end up going on an accounting route.
And most of the time it's used as a way to be pleasant toward people. Like when you arrive and you say, okay, I'm an accountant, most of the time people try to avoid the conversation. And so if you say that you like arts, okay, yeah, we can talk about this.
It's just a different point about all the sort of the plot points that you just mentioned. I think another interesting thing about this accountant figure is that he's the knowledgeable person. He has the knowledge. Because he can see through the books, and because he has this memory of all of his clients that he's worked with, he's both a danger to the people who open their books to him, and a person of interest for federal investigation or treasury. And I thought that was really interesting. obviously considering my research, but the accountant person is the person who knows, who has the knowledge of the company, and that makes him both, of course, an expert and someone that can be very valuable, but also very dangerous.
We get a close encounter where Ray, the head of the U.S. Treasury, is talking about this encounter that he had with what was essentially Christian, where basically Ray was watching over this this group of mob guys that were responsible for killing Christian's mentor from prison. And Ray was the officer that kind of or that he didn't cause him to get killed, but he didn't help prevent it, let's say. So he was surveying these group of mob members, and then Christian goes in to kill them. And we flash back to this original scene from the very beginning of the movie, where Christian kind of lets Ray go after Ray says that like he's doing his best as a father, kind of a thing, and Ray or Christian shows mercy on him, doesn't kill him along with the other mob members. Then, as Ray's telling this story to Mary Beth starts to realize that this voice, that's the same voice that Christian talks to, has been kind of feeding Ray information about these, or to help Ray further his career in the U.S. Treasury. And then we go to the assassins that are the assassins that are Lamar, the CEO of Living Robotics. They're at his house setting up, and the assassins are kind of questioning Lamar about what's going on. And Lamar has this moment where he's saying, like how good his company does for people. And that, like all these things, sometimes the bad is needed for the good, essentially what he's trying to say, which I thought, for me, I was contrasting that a lot with the, that original scene when they're talking about Living Robotics, and they're talking about how much good the company does for everybody, but then there's this evil side to it. I was basically just picking out dialectics across this entire movie, just any kind of opposites that I could find. Then Christian attacks the CEO's compound, and we get this shootout where Christian obviously kills everyone very quickly and efficiently, as any accountant assassin would. Almost as if he's getting charged like billable hours or something like that in carrying out his tasks. And once he's reached the final boss, he realizes that this head assassin for Lamar is actually his long lost brother. They have this reconnection moment before Christian abruptly shoots the CEO when the CEO starts trying to explain, which Cecilia gave away the ending. But I found, just generally, like with all of the killing scenes, I found it so strange how methodical and just efficient he was as this assassin, to be capped off with him killing the main bad guy at the very end in a style that's, when you watch an action movie or you watch a movie and the villain always starts explaining why they're doing what they're doing, and it just gives the hero time to get out of the situation. I found it funny that in this situation, it was just so methodical, right? He was there to kill this guy. He kills the guy. It's done. And I kind of enjoyed, I don't want to say I enjoyed watching the guy get killed, but I enjoyed that it was so cut and dry, right? There was no lengthy explanation about, let me connect all the dots for you. And then just to round out the movie, Christian leaves a note for Dana saying that she deserves WoW, and he sends her this painting that she had been admiring of his. instead of these dogs playing poker on the main painting, she reveals, oh, it's this Pollock painting that she'd liked that Christian had. And then we kind of end with this scene at the same place where Christian was being evaluated by the doctor before, where there's two random parents talking to this psychologist about their child, and the child kind of wanders into this room where we find out that she's actually the voice that's been dealing with Christian.
Despite its shortcomings, we discussed many of them, the ways that the movie maybe misrepresents or underrepresents the intricacies of the accounting profession, I think it's still nice to have a representation of the accounting profession out there. I mean, there are no shows like there's Law and Order, there's Chicago MD, there's shows about fire departments, but there are no TV shows about accountants. So at least we're out there, we're in people's minds, which I think is an improvement over not being in the conversation at all.
You'll be excited to know that that there's going to be an accountant too. So
No.
yes,
No,
I was reading
joking.
about. Yeah, they're making an accounting too. I know.
Oh,
Where do you go from here?
Dana could handle
exactly.
it. You know, it would be quite interesting. You know.
Oh, brilliant! But I was actually thinking, but maybe Ingrid knows better. But the way accountants moved in popular culture and cinema in particular, from being this geeky white guy who, instead of being the hero, would be that guy who takes, has to give out all the information to the hero so that he can move forward with his action movie. And so moving from that to actually being the hero and just mixing the two, rather than being the unknown actor who plays for 2 minutes to explain how the fraud worked and then probably gets shot or something. And then they actually combined both this and the action hero. And that's, for me, that's the great point, or the great thing about this movie. And I was wondering if, the accountant is not the hero of the 21st century, popular culture, or the villain, actually, both probably. And I wonder how it's going to go moving forward, given this way that we've already done. Yeah.
I think that's a really good point, Cecilia, because the whole idea of this accountant movie is a bit of a shock, because you just don't associate the accountant with running around with a machine gun, which is, one of the image or the trailers of the movie. So it's a really strong juxtaposition of bringing together an accountant with this action hero. So I think that's a clever idea for a Hollywood movie. But then the whole autism thing is very interesting as well. There's so many, because I looked up NHS in the UK, the NHS health, to give sort of explanations of different aspects of autism. And it really chimes with a lot of the typical accountant stereotype that we're used to seeing. So maybe somebody who likes routine, cautious, obsessive about detail, difficulty with social interactions. These are what we're used to seeing in the accounting stereotype literature. So I think that the autism story or autism angle kind of, it really does add an important dimension to the movie, because otherwise it would be sort of unbelievable to have a regular our idea of a regular accountant as an action hero. But the autism element really kind of helps us explain how this accountant could also be involved in forensic accounting and criminality and that. So overall, although I didn't think it was a great movie, they did bring together two very interesting aspects, accounting and autism, which are useful to reflect on.
Yes, I fully agree with Ingrid about this connection and how, you know, the stereotypes binds or talk one to the other, and I think this is really an interesting part. I was thinking about autism and also what I very quickly, but maybe you know more, read about autism is also the relationship with good and bad. And there is something, you know, in this character, because he's a killer, you know, but he's doing the good, you know, trying to give information to if he judges the businesses too badly. So it's this kind of, you know, double agent also, and this position of double agent is quite interesting, because it also, without saying it, also echoes some of the situations accountant can face, and in particular, when I'm thinking about management accountant, you know, with its part of being, you know, the business partner of the, you know, local operational manager, and also when they judge, you know, something is bad, they should, you know, inform the, you know, the hierarchy and the top management about this, and, you know, this position, which in fact Christian does not handle very, you know, softly, you know, killing people when he judges finally that they're not good. I don't want to know. But there, you know, there is this kind of double face accountants, which is also quite interesting within this movie. I didn't capture at the beginning, but then it evolved in understanding the relation with the Ray and Mary. The Mary. I can't remember the name of the. You will trumpet. So Mary Kay. That's it. Yeah, I think so.
Mary Bell.
Mary Bell, and how, you know, she will be informed, and this role of informer, in fact, double agent and informer. I thought it was also quite interesting.
Yeah, I totally agree. I also think one thing I found interesting is that this movie shows that there is not one single way, good intelligence. There is no single, sorry, I will start again. It shows that there is not only one way to be clever. Like, it's good to have accountant like Christian, maybe introverts and really clever, and it's good to have accountant very outgoing, who likes to have drinks with clients, etc. And I think more and more we have this broad image that everybody, not only accountant, but everybody need to have this social intelligence. And it shows that if you are introvert, if you are shy, if you don't like social interaction, you can still be a good professional and a good person. So it shows that.